Our next topic is going to be connective tissue. And if you'll recall from our overview of the tissues, connective tissue is mostly extracellular matrix. It's not typically made out of dense cells packed right next to each other where all of the cells connect to other cells with intracellular connections or anything like that. It mostly consists of this network, non-cellular network of cables called the extracellular matrix with cells suspended in that extracellular matrix every so often. So the first thing that you have to do to understand connective tissue is understand the extracellular matrix. So first thing to know is by themselves, cells generally don't have much structure. Epithelial tissue is primarily like just a flat layer. So it's a lining that's flat. It might be thick, it might be thin, but it basically just follows the contours of whatever it's sitting on top of. If your body was just made out of cells, you'd basically just be like a lump of flesh. We can grow cells. So for instance, we can grow epithelial tissue for like skin grafts and things like that. One of the things that we can't do is grow organs, at least not very well, not yet. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that while we can get the cells there, the organization that the extracellular matrix gives to it is something that we can't quite make yet. So the complicated three-dimensional structure and organization that organs and tissues have, like a liver or a heart cell, basically most of that form is given to it by the connective tissue. The connective tissue is what's going to hook these layers of epithelial tissue together. It's going to be the scaffold through which nerves and muscles and blood vessels move through. Those all move through the connective tissue. So the connective tissue, and specifically this three-dimensional organization of the extracellular matrix, is what's going to give that structure to it. So here's sort of a metaphor that I like to think of when I think of the extracellular matrix, right? So you see this little play structure. All of you have probably seen this sort of play structure before. Many of you may have played on one as a kid. And you see that you've got all of these kids, and they're all climbing up and down on the bars. They're all holding the bars. When they want to move, they swing from one bar to the next, or they climb from one bar to the next. You can think of cells in the extracellular matrix as being sort of equivalent to this, right? So most of these kids aren't actually grabbing hold of or touching other kids. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, what they're interacting with is they're interacting with the bars of this play structure. And the cells of connective tissue hang off the cables of the extracellular matrix in much the same way that these kids are hanging off of the bars of this play structure. And the more complicated the arrangement of bars for the play structure, you could think of this as being sort of a simple dome, but you may have seen some really fancy play structures that have like multiple levels and stuff like that. And the more complicated the play structure is, the more different arrangements of kids hanging off of it you can have, and the more fun the kids are going to have. The extracellular matrix is formed of several components. Most of those components are some variety of polysaccharide or protein, or possibly even a combination of the two. Remember that a polysaccharide is a sugar, basically, a carbohydrate, and proteins, we all know what proteins are. Two of the most common proteins in the extracellular matrix are collagen and elastin. those are both fibrous proteins, meaning that the protein is made out of, there are actually many, many copies of the protein, and then just like the protein is made out of a polymer of amino acids, these protein units themselves will polymerize into long cables. Collagen is the most abundant protein in the extracellular matrix. It is, in fact, the most abundant protein in the body. And it is very, very strong. You can think of it like rope, like steel rope even. Collagen actually has several times the tensile strength of steel. That means that if you had a collagen fiber and a steel fiber of the same thickness, you could actually support more weight with the collagen fiber than you could with the steel. It's very, very strong. But only towards pulling force. You can't push things with it because it's not stiff for the most part. Collagen is the primary component of your tendons and ligaments, and it is the cable that gives your skin its strength and its ability to resist tearing and breaking. Another abundant protein, this is not as abundant as collagen, but it is still fairly commonly found, often in connection with collagen, is elastin. And as you might guess from the name, elastic is stretchy. And while it's not as strong as collagen, it doesn't break. Like if you do stretch collagen past its breaking point, the collagen just snaps. Elastin, when you stretch it, well, it stretches. And so it allows tissues to deform, to change shape, or to stretch without tearing. Many connective tissues are made of a combination of collagen and elastin. The more collagen something has, the stronger it will be. The more elastin something has, the stretchier it will be without breaking. Now, these are the two of the main fibers that move through the extracellular matrix. The third is reticular fibers. Reticule means net. Reticular fibers like connect together to form really, really large nets, and things can hang off of them. They have lots of handholds. We'll talk about those later. Those are probably the least common in most types of connective tissue. But these cables, these fibers, are not being stretched through a void. They're being stretched through a liquid medium, and that liquid medium isn't just water. The non-fibrous, like big long cable portion of the extracellular matrix is called the ground substance. The ground substance is made of water. That's its primary component. But also, well, it depends on exactly the type of connective tissue that we're talking about. But in most forms of connective tissue, it's going to be composed of water, something called Glycosaminoglycans. These are a type of, well, they're mostly sugar, but they're sugar with some substitutes on it. Glyco Proteins, so you might guess from the name. Remember, gly means sugar, and protein is protein. And these are proteins that have sugar groups attached to them, but they're mostly protein. And also proteoglycans. Proteo means protein and glycan means sugar. These are the flip side of that coin. They're long chains of sugar groups with peptides or proteins hanging off of them They're more sugar than protein, but they're still a combination of the two. These are by no means the only things that are found in the ground substance, and some things, like for instance, bone and cartilage, might have special components in the extracellular matrix, but in most fibrous connective tissue, these are the main components that you're going to find. Heparin, which you may have heard of before, chondroitin sulfate, and keratin sulfate. You may also have heard of keratin before. These are proteoglycans, and they are they actually do several things. One thing that they do is they provide strength, not quite as much as collagen does, but they provide a strength that's more like sort of a bulletproof vest. Your skin and hair and nails are actually mostly made out of keratin, to give you an idea of what that substance is like. They also convey information to cells. A cell knows where it is and what it is doing based off of where it is in the extracellular matrix. So if you take a bone cell and you put it into, say, areolar tissue extracellular matrix, it freaks out and probably dies because it goes, you know, I'm bone. I shouldn't be here. This is not my extracellular matrix. They tell cells when to divide, where to divide, what shape to divide into. Control the orientation of cells as tissue builds. So they convey a lot of information, particularly structural information, to cells. And they help regulate their development, when they can divide, when they can't. Some other extracellular matrix components from the ground substance: hyaluronic acid. This actually helps cells resist compression. So, like, let's say that you're riding your bike down a hill, and there's a rock, and you go flying, and you land on your shoulder, right? You're going to do damage to that tissue there. Probably you'll have a nice bruise the next day. Hopefully you were wearing a helmet so you didn't actually, hurt your head or anything like that. But the reason why you still have a shoulder, and all of those cells didn't just die due to all of that compressive force when you landed really hard on your shoulder, is at least in part due to hyaluronic acid. It is, it's sort of like Kevlar or ballistic gel, right? It takes a force and spreads that force out so that that force has less impact on each individual cell. And so it helps you absorb shocks, helps cells resist compression without becoming so deformed that they die. Another very important component of the extracellular matrix is called fibronectin. Fibronectin is kind of a handhold. So remember that picture with the kids on the play structure? Well, your cells don't actually grab directly on to the play structure. The play structure has little handholds for them. So they grab hold of this fibronectin handhold, and then that fibronectin connects them to the cables of the extracellular matrix. You may also recognize fibronectin as the connective protein for hemidesmosomes, and that makes sense because if you recall, hemidesmosomes attach the basal layer of epithelial tissue to the basal membrane, the basement membrane, which is connective tissue. So those cells are holding on to the connective tissue through these fibronectin handholds. here we can see a picture of some of the components of the extracellular matrix. So here we see, this is the plasma membrane of a cell, and it has many things inside of it. And here we have an actin filament, which is part of the cytoskeleton of the cell inside. And this here, integrin, right? Integrin is actually the protein that's a part of the cell. This is the cell's hand, and it grabs hold of fibronectin, right? That's that little handhold that it grabs onto. Then the fibronectin connects to these collagen fibers. Those are those really strong fibers that help your skin and your tendons and ligaments and really all of your connective tissue to be to resist tearing. And we don't have elastin here, but they can also attach to elastin. That's that stretchier fiber. And here in the background, you can see the ground substance. And remember that the ground substance is made out of these proteoglycans and Glyco Proteins and things like that. And here we can see this is actually probably a proteoglycan. It's got this a sort of protein fibrous bit, and it has all of these long polysaccharides coming out of it. And what they do is they actually connect with water and ions, and they form this pressure-resisting gel that is going to help that area resist like impacts. Collagen helps it to resist tears, but in order to resist like just impact, thump, somebody punches you, that sort of thing, you need these gels that are going to spread that force out. So there are three main fiber components of the extracellular matrix, two of which we've already talked about, but let's give a little bit more detail. The most abundant fiber is collagen. And there are actually several different types of collagen, depending upon the type of tissue that it is. Not all collagen is the same. There's like type 1 collagen, type 2 collagen, type 3 and 4 and 5 collagen. And different collagens are actually going to have different properties. Some are going to be stronger, some are going to be more impact resistant. But collagen, or the collagen family of proteins, is the most abundant of the body's proteins. About 25% of the protein mass of your body is collagen. They are tough, strong, flexible, not stretchy so much, but they can bend like a rope or a cable. They're very stretch resistant. Where are you going to find collagen? Well, you're going to find it pretty much everywhere that you have connective tissue. But it's going to be most abundant in tendons, ligaments, and in the deeper layers of the skin, what's called your dermis. Your epidermis is primarily epithelial tissue, but the dermis is where the strength of your skin comes from. You also find collagen forming the underlying matrix of cartilage and bone. But in both cartilage and bone, the collagen fibers have actually been reinforced with other things to make them even tougher. Sort of like, if you know, like rebar in concrete. You put this rebar reinforcement and steel reinforced concrete, and suddenly you come up with a structure that is far stronger than either of them are on their own. The second type of fiber, reticular fibers. Remember that reticule means net. These are going to be fibers that form lots and lots of connections with each other, and they have lots of handholds, lots of glycoprotein handholds that cells can hang off of. These often form like scaffolds for cells that are less intended for strength, but more intended to provide meeting spaces for lots and lots of cells. Sometimes your filtering organs, so things like your spleen and lymph nodes and other immune system organs, will be made out of reticular fibers, because these are places where your white blood cells need to be able to meet up with each other and talk and share information about all of the various antigens or microbes that they've found, so that they can coordinate in keeping your body safe. Last, we have elastic fibers. Elastic fibers are thinner and usually darker, or at least they usually appear darker in stains, than collagenous fibers. They can branch and rejoin each other, so they have a little bit more of a net-making property than collagenous fibers, but not as much as reticular. They allow for stretch and recoil. They're made of this protein called elastin. The more elastic fibers that you have, the more stretchy a tissue is going to be. So for instance, as you age, the elastin fibers, the elastic fibers in your skin begin to break down. And when that happens, your skin loses both its suppleness, its ability to stretch and rebound, so it tears easier, and it loses this sort of stretchy fiber, the springy fiber that's keeping it nice and taut, and it becomes loose, and this is part of what causes wrinkles, is a breakdown of the elastic fibers in the skin. The ground substance, we said that there are a number of different components of it. The ground substance can change dramatically based off of exactly what type of connective tissue we're talking about. It's usually got this sort of gel-like or rubbery consistency. We have Glycosaminoglycans, which are also called GAGs. These are long polysaccharides, so long sugar groups connected together. And those sugars have amino groups on them and uronic acid groups on them. And these are going to, they're very, very hydrophilic, and they hold on to water, and they hold on to electrolytes, which are salt ions. And so they regulate the amount of water and electrolyte balance that you have in tissues. The most abundant of these is what's called chondroitin sulfate. Chondroitin sulfate is particularly found in cartilage, and it is what makes cartilage stiff, or it's part of what makes cartilage stiff. Heparin has several properties, one of which is as an anticoagulant. Heparin lines your blood vessels and stops your blood from clotting. Hyaluronic acid makes lots of handholds that cells can move across. Proteoglycans is the next big category. These are huge molecules that are actually a protein core with gags coming off of them. They're shaped kind of like brush bottles, right? So these, the proteoglycans, are going to have this long filamentous structure, and then you're going to have your gags coming off of them like the bristles on a brush, like that. These are basically what's going to form the gel-like substance. They organize all of these gags together, and then the gags hold onto water and hold onto ions and other things. And last, we have Glyco Proteins. Remember, these are mostly protein, but with some sugar groups added onto them. These are mostly going to be things like, fibronectin and stuff like that, and they're going to grab hold, perhaps, of the glycosaminoglycans. So they might come down here and grab hold of the glycosaminoglycans. They may grab hold of one of these thick collagen fibers. Let's say we have a thick collagen fiber up here. They may grab hold and connect to that. These are mostly the connectors. All right, so take-home messages, bullet points for this lecture. It's very important that you know what the extracellular matrix is. You need to know the main components, the 3 fibers and their different roles. So collagen, elastin, and reticular fibers. You need to know what the ground substance is and what are the main things that you would find in the ground substance. Glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, and glycoproteins. You should know that they give, for instance, sort of the ballistic or impact resistance to your cells and to the extracellular matrix. And you should know that they bind water and electrolytes and manage the electrolyte balance of the extracellular matrix.